Many of you probably already know the story of Rudolph, the famous reindeer who used his glowing red nose to guide Santa's sleigh through a blizzard and save Christmas. His legacy of embracing his uniqueness is something we can all take to heart, and it's this legend that affects the residents of Christmastown even decades later. But Rudolph wasn't the only misfit who learned what made them special. Our story begins, oddly enough, in the month of July. Though this may be the middle of hot summers for many folks around the world, it's still ice cold at the North Pole. Most of Santa's reindeer had children by that point, with his current lead deer, Raymond, being the last to start a family. But finally, on that happy, sunny day, Raymond and his wife were blessed with a daughter. Everyone in Christmastown were especially excited for this news because Raymond was no ordinary deer. He was also a descendant of the famous Rudolph, and like his mother and grandfather before him, he inherited the magical ability to make his bright red nose glow, to which everyone in his family with this gift had proudly led Santa's sleigh team every Christmas. No one had any doubt his daughter would as well someday. "What should we name her, honey?" Raymond asked his wife. The missus regarded their young doe sleeping in the hay of the cave they resided in, then said, "It's kind of appropriate she was born in July because the birthstone for this month is Ruby, and considering how long it took for her to come to us, that makes her as precious as a gemstone." "It's perfect," her husband replied with a smile, "and in the family tradition of giving our children names that begin with an R, Ruby it is then." Many of the other reindeer, as well as Santa and the elves, stopped by throughout the day to congratulate the new parents. But upon taking a closer look at the child, a curious few pointed out, "Her nose looks rather dark," said an elf. "Is her nose supposed to glow right away, or does that happen later?" asked a deer. Raymond and his wife had no answer, for they were too caught up in the excitement of having their child to notice such small but important details. But now they too spared a closer glance and realized Ruby's nose was far from being any shade of red. But not one to be easily worried, the couple shrugged off any onlookers' concerns. "She's probably just a late bloomer," Ruby's mother surmised. "I'm sure her gift will show itself in time." "I have every faith she's going to do great things," Raymond spoke with confidence. "Her inner light will eventually come out, as it always does with everyone in our family." As it always seems to with children, time quickly passed, and within a year or two, Ruby had grown into a young doe. Her curiosity had no bounds, and she asked questions about anything and everything, eager to learn why the sky was blue, or how clouds formed, or how Santa was able to deliver presents all across the globe in one day. As such, she never saw school as a bore, and she loved it dearly. In spite of this, however, she could also be rather shy when it came to trying to make friends, and that shyness was born from the one thing she didn't love, the questions other people would ask about her. Or rather, one question in particular. "Doesn't your nose glow?" Ruby's classmates seemed to ask her this every week, sometimes on the daily. Every time it was the same. "Why doesn't your nose glow?" someone would ask. "I don't know, should it?" Ruby would answer. "Well, your dad's does," they'd retort. "Doesn't yours?" Ruby was also quick to figure out that "I don't know" isn't a satisfying enough response for some people, so when a few onlookers were bold enough to ask her to light up her nose, she developed a clever list of excuses. I can't today, I have a cold." Sorry, I don't feel like it right now." Or, It's pretty bright out today, I don't need the light." But these tiny white lies could only delay the truth for so long, the truth that her nose hadn't so much as flickered since the day she was born. And as frustrating as the endless questions were, even more frustrating was not knowing the answer. The real answer, that is. So finally one day, Ruby came up to her father and asked, "Why is everyone so interested in my nose?" Raymond breathed a sigh, the kind that indicated he knew this day was coming. "I suppose this is good timing," he told her. "I knew I'd have to explain this to you someday. It may as well be now. Follow me." "Where are we going?" his daughter asked as she fell into step beside him. "Santa's house." He pointed to their destination with his antlers. "The first castle on the left. Actually, the only castle on the left." Ruby let out a soft gasp. She had never been in Santa's castle before. Whatever her dad was about to tell her must have been very important if he was taking her all the way there. Upon entering Santa's stately, lively, colorful home, the young doe was led past the bustling workshop where the elves were busy making toys, and down a quiet hallway where, upon the walls, there hung a series of paintings. Portraits, to be exact, but not of Mr. or Mrs. Claus or any of the elves. It was of reindeer, one of which looked very familiar. "Is that you?" Ruby asked her dad, pointing a hoof at his painted copy on the wall. "It is." Raymond's chest puffed up a little with pride. "This is our family history. It all began with Santa's original 8 members of his sleigh team. You know Dasher and Dancer and Prancer and Vixen. Comet and Cupid and Donner and Blitzen." Ruby finished the roll call. "I know. That's one of the first things they teach us at school." Her father nodded. "Well, did I ever tell you that Donner is your great-great-grandfather?" Ruby's mouth fell open in surprise. "No way, really?" "That's right," Raymond smiled, a twinkle in his eye. "And do you recall how Donner fathered the most famous reindeer of all?" By then, Ruby's eyes were as wide as saucers. "You mean?" "I do." Her dad pointed to another portrait earlier in the row, one that her and all her classmates saw in all their history books. Rudolph the red-nosed reindeer, who had a shiny nose, and if you ever saw it, you'd even say it glows. "But then one foggy Christmas Eve, Santa came to say," Ruby recalled the rhyme she often heard the choir club sing at school. "Rudolph, with your nose so bright, won't you guide my sleigh tonight?" And he did just that. Raymond regarded his grandfather's picture with great reverence. Once regarded as a misfit, he used his unique gift to save Christmas and bring joy to everyone across the world, and he did so every year since. His gaze then traveled down the line of paintings, all depicting similar-looking reindeer with the same glowing red light upon their snouts. And then he passed on his gift to his daughter, my mom and your Grandma Rose, and then Rose had me, and now I have you. He gave Ruby a smooch on the nose, making her giggle before continuing. "Every one of us who gained his special gift has guided Santa's sleigh every year, and I'm certain that someday you'll take up that mantle as well." The young doe wished she could. Helping Santa Claus deliver his presents was the highest honor that could be given to a reindeer. To lead the team was even greater. There was just one problem. Her nose had yet to so much as sparkle, let alone even light up a room. But too afraid to ask why it wasn't working properly, Ruby instead shrugged and said, "So, why did Grandpa Rudolph's nose glow to begin with?" Raymond shook his head. No one's really sure why, but many think he was filled with so much Christmas spirit that it just burst out in a form that Christmastown needed the most. "Christmas spirit?" Ruby tilted her head, confused. "It's something that comes from the heart," her father tried to explain. "It's warmth and joy and love and selflessness, the need to want to help people, all rolled into one. It's something you feel and something you do, using your talents to bring peace and happiness to everyone." Ruby frowned. "I don't understand." "You will one day. I know it's hard to describe, but you'll see." Her dad spoke with the wisdom of someone with experience. "Anyway, it's growing late. We should be getting home. Your first flying lesson is next week, and your mom and I want to make sure you're prepared." With that, father and daughter dear left Santa's castle and headed back to their cozy cave. The whole way home, Ruby kept quiet, but on the inside her thoughts were loud and going a mile a minute. Everyone knew the song about Rudolph, but she didn't know his magical light was rare and special, or that she was related to him, or that her family was that famous. She knew about her dad's glowing nose and how he led the sleigh team every year, but it wasn't until that day she realized how important all this truly was. This wasn't just a job. This was a legacy she'd now have to live up to. She wasn't exactly sure what else everyone expected of her other than someday leading the sleigh team, but one thing she was sure of was that she wouldn't let anyone down. And the first order of business was to get her nose to glow. For the next solid week, Ruby spent every free moment she had alone, trying with all her might to get any kind of light to shine from her snout. Even just a hint of rosiness would have made her happy. She tried every possible thing she could think of, from concentrating really hard to eating nothing but red food like apples and berries, to practicing magic tricks, none of which worked. But at least she now knew how to pull a rabbit out of a hat. Things didn't get much better the day of her first flying lesson. The reindeer games were nothing to scoff at. These were the events that trained the deer to be the best Christmas helpers they could be, from flying to pulling heavy carts full of toys. Ruby knew all her classmates would be there, and she knew they'd be watching her and wondering when her nose would finally light up. Well, it may not have glowed, but she could at least make it look red. Maybe then everyone would stop asking her questions about it. And people wore makeup all the time, so what made putting a little paint on her snout any different? And so, the morning of the reindeer games, Ruby got a hold of a bottle of red ink and slathered it all over her nose, turning it a deep crimson. She took a long look at herself in the mirror, proud at her cleverness. At long last, she looked more like her father, and upon arriving at the games, her classmates all marveled at her cherry red snout. It was the most confident she had felt in ages, and she was more sure than ever she could make her family proud. All that confidence was shattered the moment the flying lesson started. The adults made it look easy, leading Ruby to find out the hard way that defying gravity was trickier than it seemed. It took 5 tries just for her to get off the ground, and once she was in the air, the wind battered her around like a volleyball. Realizing it was futile to pick a fight with nature, the young doe was spun around a few more times before being unceremoniously tossed headfirst into a snowbank. Her classmates all gathered around to help pull her out and see if she was all right. All that goodwill changed when Ruby was finally rescued. The wet snow had washed all the paint off her nose, and the moment her little charade was exposed, her schoolmates glared at her. "Hey, her nose ain't red, it's paint," exclaimed one young buck. "You mean she was faking it?" another doe said with disappointment. "Aw man, that's not nice." A wave of betrayed grumbles passed through the crowd as all the small bucks and does shook their heads at Ruby and walked off, upset at being tricked. In turn, Ruby hung her head in shame, now feeling incredibly stupid for trying to lie to everyone. And worse, what would they think of her family now? Between her horrible flying and her fake nose, she probably gave her dad a bad name. She slowly trudged home, wishing she could sink into the ground and disappear. From then on, Ruby was more determined than ever to figure out why her nose refused to glow. Attached to Santa's castle was a rather large library filled with hundreds of books about every topic under the sun. Surely one of them had to have an answer for her. And so, every day after school, the young doe would lose herself among the shelves of information, reading stack after stack of old tomes in the hopes her snout could finally shine for real. From cookbooks to sorcery scrolls, no stone was left unturned, and all paths led to dead ends. However, her pursuit of knowledge wasn't completely fruitless. As it turned out, magic wasn't the only way to get a job done. There were just as many books dedicated to science as there were spells, and as time went on, Ruby found herself drawn to the stories and papers that showed her how to engineer her way out of a problem rather than count on magic words that were becoming increasingly unreliable. One book about electricity was especially fascinating, and for a moment she thought of attaching some kind of light bulb to her snout. Until she saw all the wiring involved and didn't fancy the thought of accidentally zapping herself. As such, she finally and reluctantly came to the conclusion she was hoping to avoid but could no longer deny: the fact that Rudolph's gift hadn't been given to her. She had a plain, old, ordinary nose that had just as many chances of glowing as a fish did of climbing a tree. She wondered what her parents would think of her. Well, Ruby may have given up on magic, but she hadn't lost her determination to make her family proud. If her nose refused to work, then she decided that maybe she could make up for it by inventing something instead. Santa and the elves worked so hard at making toys for children all over the world, perhaps they'd let her help out in the workshop. Maybe she could build a few gadgets for them to make their jobs easier. She had stumbled across an old book of blueprints from back when the elves first built the workshops when Christmastown was founded, and she already had a few ideas of how some of their machines could be improved. One day, Ruby worked up the nerve to tiptoe into the main toy shop and nervously asked the head elf if she could borrow some of their tools. "I have some ideas to make your machines better," she explained, "but I have nothing to build with." Ives, the boss elf, was a bit perplexed as to why this little doe was eager to spend her free time in a dusty, crowded, and loud factory rather than fly around in the peaceful woods, but he saw no harm in it either, especially if it meant having another pair of hands to help out, or hooves in this case. He pointed to a small wagon nearby. Well, I'm not sure what you're looking for, but we appreciate all the help we can get around here. Why don't you take this wagon and deliver these supplies to the other buildings? Everything we have has to go toward making toys, but whatever pieces of scrap or spare tools you find is yours to use. Ruby was more than happy with the arrangement. She knew how odd she must have sounded and was surprised he even agreed in the first place. Putting her sleigh-pulling exercises to good use, the doe dutifully drove the wagon full of wood, plastic, rubber, paint, cloth, and other odds and ends to the different workshops. Most reindeer only saw the end results of the elves' labor, which made Ruby all the more fascinated as to how all the toys were actually made. And so, every day after the reindeer games ended for the afternoon, the little doe would arrive at the toy shop and eagerly pull carts back and forth, watching carefully at how teddy bears were stuffed, how dolls were sewn, how the cars and trains were built and painted, and how all the assembly line machines worked, among many other things. And the entire time, Ruby developed an ever-growing pile of leftover wood, metal, screws, nails, linens, light bulbs, wire, paint, even some rusty tools the elves no longer wanted. She felt lucky and grateful for every piece of trash she could potentially turn into treasure, and finally, after a week or two of stockpiling, she was ready to begin inventing. Ruby quickly discovered that it was one thing to have ideas, it was another challenge entirely to bring those ideas to life. First, she had to draw the contraption she saw in her mind, then she had to figure out how to actually build it, and then she had to test and see if any of it would even work. Combine all that with the fact that she had never used any tools before in her life, and the doe realized that, much like flying, this goal she set for herself was going to be tougher than it looked. All at once, she gained a new respect for the many inventors she read about in the library and all the hardships they must have gone through. But strangely, it was that very notion that spurred her on. If these other scientists were able to do it, then so could she. Ruby was going to make her family proud one way or another. She picked an out-of-the-way corner of the toy shop, got her tools ready, and after completing her supply run, she spent the next few days finally setting to work on her first invention. Many of the elves stared at her with curiosity. Plenty of other reindeer popped in and out of the workshop to say hi to a friend or help haul stuff somewhere. It was something else to see a small doe drilling and hammering away as much as they were, but as long as she wasn't causing trouble, they let her be. And after close to a week of being kept in suspense, they finally learned what their young friend was building. One afternoon, Ruby was shaking with utter nervousness as she approached Ives and asked him to take a look at what she made. The boss elf was thankful for all her help in the shop, so he was more than happy to humor her. He stared at the strange contraption that looked more akin to a bear trap and asked what it was. In response, the doe placed a toy car inside the weird gadget, then pushed a button. Suddenly, a bunch of wood and metal arms came up and around the car, sealing it in a box of shiny paper. It's an instant present wrapper, Ruby muttered. I thought it could help wrap presents faster. Ives blinked in amazement. That's pretty impressive. I'll have to show this to Santa to see what he thinks, but if he approves, this could be a big help to us. Nice work, honey. In that moment, all the butterflies in Ruby's stomach flew away and was replaced with a warmth in her chest she had never felt before. She couldn't tell if it was pride or happiness or a bit of both, but it was a feeling she liked and wished would stay forever. The sense that she had done something right, that she was doing what she was meant to do. A spark seemed to rush through her, and for just a second, she believed she may have finally tapped into some genuine magic. Unfortunately, that supposed magic didn't last very long. Getting Santa's approval on her first creation had put Ruby on cloud 9, though she wished that walking on air feeling could help her be a better flyer, but she remained as clumsy as ever. Seeing her invention being used in the toy shop gave her such a confidence boost that she was sure her next idea would be just as good as her first one. However, she didn't know that overconfidence had its drawbacks, which left her unprepared for the crushing disappointment when her next gadget, a pair of robot arms that could sew doll clothes in seconds, failed harder than a balloon filled with lead. The little doe couldn't understand where she went wrong. She was sure she measured and cut everything right, and she followed her blueprint exactly. Yet the arms just wouldn't cooperate. They kept threading the needles wrong or tore the fabric altogether. After dozens of tries with no improvements, Ives finally patted her on the head and suggested she try something else. All of Ruby's something else's didn't fare much better. From dolls that could grow hair, to color-changing crayons, to airplanes that flew when you sang, her ideas sounded great on paper, but trying to get them to actually work was proving to be near impossible. The dolls remained bald, the crayons melted, and the airplanes refused to fly, even with a chorus of elves chiming in to help. The young doe was beginning to wonder if her gift-wrapping invention was just a happy fluke. Not helping matters was that when her classmates asked her where she disappeared to every day after school, and she finally told them, the other does and bucks gave her funny looks. "I think we're just supposed to fly and pull Santa's sleigh," said one doe. "The elves are the ones who make the toys." "I know." Ruby pawed at the ground, embarrassed at her unconventional hobby. I just want to help." "But we do help out," said a buck. "We fly Santa's presents around the world. That's what we're supposed to do." Ruby disagreed. Remembering the special feeling she got when she created the present wrapper, she tried to explain. "I don't know. I don't think this magic stuff's really working for me. I like inventing things. At least then I can hold it and touch it. Can't do that with magic." The other reindeer stared at her as though she grew two heads. One buck mumbled, "What a weirdo." "Yeah, who ever heard of a scientist reindeer?" laughed a doe. Their words stung worse than a bee. Ruby's nose didn't glow, and she could barely fly, which put her at a loss of what else to do. She wasn't going to give up on her dreams so easily. If she could get just one more invention to work, it would prove all her effort was worth it. She'd show everyone she could do something amazing. Well, Ruby's next creation was amazing. An amazingly catastrophic disaster. The doe had come up with the wild idea to invent a paint cannon to paint all the toys in a matter of seconds. This time she made sure to triple check her math and measurements at every step, testing every last bolt and screw and wire to be certain everything was perfect. When all was set and ready, she loaded the miniature cannon with paint, took aim at a freshly carved wooden train set, and pushed the button to fire. Sadly, the contraption worked a little too well. It started off slow as planned, lobbing colorful globs of red and blue at the mini locomotive and covering each train car in mere moments. Ruby was about to congratulate herself on something finally going right, until there came a spark from one of the power cables. Suddenly the cannon picked up speed, and before the tiny deer knew it, her invention spun around like a tornado and began firing green and yellow and orange and pink projectiles all over the workshop. Stacks of toys were knocked over, paint got into the assembly lines and jammed the gears, and elves tripped over each other as they ran screaming. Only when Ruby found the off switch did the chaos finally end, leaving the once organized toy factory in a rainbow-coated disarray. "Great bouncing icebergs!" came a shout. "Is everyone all right?" All heads turned at the deep voice, revealing Santa Claus himself, standing in the doorway to his workshop and staring at the mess with his mouth hanging open. "What happened in here?" Instantly, all the elves turned to point or look at Ruby, who stood in her crafting corner, shaking like a leaf and unable to speak. She had made plenty of mistakes in her life, but this was the first time she had gotten into real, actual trouble. And worst of all, it was with Santa. She knew this mess would take hours to clean up and set back the toy making by at least a day or two. She wished she could somehow turn back the clock and stop herself from turning on that stupid cannon in the first place. As Saint Nick walked up to her, Ruby's heart pounded in her chest and she ducked her head, unable to look at him. Tears formed in her eyes, and all she could mutter was, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry," over and over. She expected him to yell at her, or banish her from the North Pole, or anything except what he actually did. To her surprise, he simply patted her on the head and said in a calm voice, "Ruby, are you okay?" The doe finally glanced up at him. There was nothing but concern in his eyes. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head. "No, sir." He then spotted the fizzled-out cannon lying on the floor and raised an eyebrow. "It seems your new gadget didn't work out the way you planned, did it?" Ruby shook her head again, then managed to mumble, "I'm really sorry. I promise I'll clean everything up." "I appreciate it, honey," Mr. Claus replied, "but this job's too big for one little deer, and it's getting late. Let me call your father and he can walk you home. I think we've all had a rough day today." Ruby put up no argument, for she was now scared of what her dad would do to her. She wouldn't be surprised if he never wanted to see her again. Within minutes, Raymond arrived at the workshop, to which Santa quietly explained what happened, then ushered the lead deer and his daughter out the door. But before they left completely, Santa said with an air of encouragement, "Ruby, I want you to know how much your gift wrapping invention helped us. You're very creative, and thinking outside the box is what propels us forward. Don't let a few failures put you down. Keep trying. Just be more careful. And maybe do your experiments somewhere else first before bringing them directly into the workshop, okay?" "Yes, sir," was all Ruby could say. The walk home was nothing short of humiliating. Both deer didn't say much. All Ruby could mutter was, "I'm sorry, Dad." There was a long pause before Raymond sighed. "I think you should take a break from the inventing for a while and focus on your flight lessons, all right?" Ruby nodded and said nothing more. For the next solid month, Ruby didn't invent a single thing, never made an attempt, tried not to even think about it. After all the trouble she caused in Santa's workshop, the last thing she wanted was to embarrass her family again. So she did as her father asked and put all of her effort toward her flight classes and the rest of the reindeer games. It wasn't easy. Her skills were still touch and go, and though she'd gotten better at taking off and staying in the air, navigating was still a problem. Her classmates couldn't help but giggle at how she had to squint her eyes to see and made weird faces when she was concentrating really hard. She couldn't help it, though. She was just trying her hardest to make her family proud. However, something just didn't sit right with her. Try as she might to ignore it, Ruby's mind couldn't help but wander back to the weeks she spent in the toy shop. All the gadgets she invented, or tried to anyway. How excited she was every afternoon to help the elves, hunt for materials, and come up with ideas. And even though it was frustrating when her creations failed, weirdly it only motivated her even more to try again. Working through a problem and making something that never existed before, it was actually kind of fun. Even better was that indescribable but unmistakable spark she felt in her chest each and every time. It just felt right somehow. That warm spark was absent now. There were only so many times the little doe could run through flight exercises before they got mind-numbingly boring for her. She wondered if something was wrong with her if she found the power of flight boring. But she didn't dare voice her thoughts aloud. Her classmates teased her enough already, and she wasn't going to make it worse. Word had spread about the paint cannon incident at the workshop, to which almost every little buck and doe felt the need to remind Ruby of her failure. "We told you it wouldn't work," they taunted. "Who ever heard of a reindeer scientist?" One day after school, Ruby was passing by Santa's castle on the way home when the boss elf Ives came rushing out of the workshop. The young doe wondered what had him in such a panic until she spotted a truck-shaped blur in the distance, a blur he was trying and failing to catch up to. "What happened, Mr. Ives?" Ruby asked as she walked up to check on the elf. Once he caught his breath, Ives explained, "I was trying to flag down the mailman, but I just missed him. I had this important letter to send out. I guess it'll have to wait until tomorrow." Ruby hated seeing him so upset. He was also the person who let her invent and hang out in the toy shop, so she felt she owed him a debt of gratitude. Without hesitation, she said, "I can deliver it for you." The elf blinked at her. "Are you sure, sweetie?" "Sure, I'm sure," she smiled. "Helping deliver stuff is what I've been going to school for." "Oh, thank you, honey. You're too kind." Ives spoke with relief. He handed her a dark green envelope. "Could you please take this to the Peppermint Lodge? It's a huge building that's just over those couple hills to the west. You can't miss it." "You got it!" Ruby grabbed the letter and took off into the sky just as she was taught, eager to get in some more flying practice, but even happier to be helping someone. She wished the confidence she tried to speak with equated to better piloting skills, but as usual, the wind didn't seem to like her and blew snowflakes in her eyes, and the landscape was nothing but pine trees scattered against a white tundra. But just as the little reindeer started to worry if she had made a mistake in trying to play mail carrier, a large brown shape came into her view on the horizon. She squinted as she drew nearer, noticing a bunch of colorful dots coming in and out of the building and trudging up a nearby hillside just to slide down it moments later. And then she realized those blurry dots were elves. And then she realized she was looking at a ski resort. and then also realized she was no longer flying but falling. Ruby had gotten so distracted at trying to find her destination, she had lost her concentration and began to drop like a rock. Quickly, she tried to gallop on the wind currents to right herself, but she wasn't fast enough. All she could do in that moment was slow her descent as much as possible and hope her landing wasn't too rough. Thankfully, luck was on her side, and she crashed into a powdery soft snowdrift just outside the resort. Not so luckily, however, she had landed head first, her hind legs sticking out of the icy slush. With the precious envelope in her mouth, she had no way of calling for help, so she furiously kicked her back legs in a vain effort to free herself. At that point, she just prayed none of the other reindeer were nearby to witness such a humiliating scene. Just then, even while stuck in the snow pile, Ruby felt a strange series of rumbles. It started off as just small vibrations, but then gradually became loud thumps that shook the ground. An earthquake? No. This was a distinct pattern that was getting closer and closer, almost like footsteps? But if that were true, whoever was making them would have to be enormous. What could possibly be that big? The doe got her answer when something furry wrapped around her hind legs. In one fell swoop, she was yanked out of the snowdrift as fast as a cork popped from a champagne bottle, and she found herself dangling helplessly in the air by a pair of fingers the size of tree trunks. As she tried to get her bearings, she turned her head and stared into a pair of eyes that were 3 times bigger than she was. Dark eyes framed by icy blue skin and fur as white as snow. One glance downward and she saw the monstrous face was attached to a gigantic gorilla-like body. The creature opened its mouth, letting out a deep growl, and that was all the more Ruby needed to begin screaming in terror, dropping her precious envelope in the process. But who cared about the mail anymore when you were about to be a Yeti's lunch? Whoa there, Bumble, what do you got there? Instantly, the monster stopped and glanced downward. Ruby quit screaming her lungs out, though her heart was still pounding in her chest. Curious as to why the creature wasn't devouring her, she too stared down to where the voice had come from. Near the Yeti's feet, a woman with curly red hair stared up at the beast with no fear whatsoever. Hands on her hips, she let out a playful sigh. "Well, don't just stand there scaring the poor girl, set her down!" To Ruby's surprise, the hairy giant did exactly as he was told. With a gentleness unexpected from a creature so huge, the Yeti cupped the doe in the palms of his enormous hands, then slowly and carefully put her down on the ground. All the while, the lady calmly spoke. "There you go, buddy, that's the way." Ruby felt only slightly better at having all 4 hooves firmly on the snow again. She still couldn't help but shiver over what just happened, to which the woman gave her a soothing pat on the head. "Hey there, honey, what's all the commotion out here? You okay?" Now that she was sure she wasn't in any danger, the little reindeer tried to catch her breath. I think so. I was trying to fly, but I crashed in the snow, and then something grabbed me, and..." All at once, the lady seemed to piece together what happened and chuckled. "Oh, no worries, dear. The Bumble must have just saw you in trouble and came to pull you out. He was just rescuing you is all." "The Bumble?" Ruby stuttered. The redhead pointed up at the Yeti. "Oh yeah, he was once a fearsome, abominable snow monster. That is, until my great-uncle Yukon Cornelius tamed him. Sorry if he scared ya, but he won't hurt a fly," she shrugged. "These days, he just sorta lounges around. Sometimes he'll help me haul carts in the peppermint mine." She looked up at her gigantic friend. "Thanks for the save, Bumble." Yeah, thanks." The young doe tried her best to be polite despite how intimidating the Yeti was. Although now that she knew he was friendly, she had to admit he was kinda cute in his own way. The Bumble let out a cheerful grunt before stomping back to wherever he came from. The ground wasn't even finished shaking when the woman turned to the doe. "So what's your name, little lady? What brings you here?" I'm Ruby," the reindeer replied. I was supposed to deliver a letter," and her words were cut off as she panicked, realizing her precious cargo was now missing. Oh no, the envelope! I must have dropped it! What am I gonna do? Mr. Ives was counting on me and— Whoa, slow down there. Easy now. Everything's fine," the redhead spoke with assurance. "It looks like BB found your note." Ruby tilted her head, confused. Who's BB? As if to answer, there came an excited series of yips, and the doe turned to see a much younger and smaller version of the bumble running up to them. In his paws was the dark green envelope, and he handed it to Ruby with a happy bark. "This is my other good friend, the baby bumble," the woman explained as she petted his fluffy, soft fur. "You'll see him lurking around here a lot. Little BB's always lending me a hand around the lodge." Thanks." The reindeer was utterly relieved that she wasn't about to have another day of mishaps. Well, I guess I should deliver this letter now." She squinted at the cursive writing on the envelope. "Is there a Alpine Penelope here?" The lady blinked at her for a moment, and then let loose a loud belly laugh that would rival Santa's. "It's your lucky day, kid. You're looking at her." "Really?" Ruby said with surprise. Really, the woman pointed at herself with a dramatic flair. "Alpine Penelope's the name. Adventuring and mining for treasure is my game. Also the proud owner and manager of the Peppermint Lodge, the best place to relax this side of the North Pole." The doe definitely believed the adventuring part. The lady was fully bundled up in a beanie hat, hiking boots, and a heavy coat covered with pockets as though she were on her way to go camping in the mountains. She kindly took the letter from Ruby before pointing to the lodge. "Come on, kid, you look exhausted. Why don't you come on in and take a break? You deserve it after face-planting in the snow just to deliver my mail." Ruby was more than happy to. She had nowhere else to be, and admittedly she was curious as to what this place was like since she had never heard of it until then. With BB in tow, the little reindeer was ushered inside, to which Penelope excitedly gave her the grand tour. The Peppermint Lodge was a big but cozy cabin retreat mostly used by the elves to relax, eat a good meal, and have fun after a hard day's work of making toys. With toasty fireplaces to warm up by, comfy couches and armchairs, and board games aplenty, it was easy to see why the place was so popular. Penelope explained how her great-uncle Yukon taught her all the survival skills he knew, and how their family got rich after discovering the nearby peppermint mine. They built the lodge not long after to help the citizens of the North Pole, and she regularly ventured into the mines to gather peppermint to make her signature desserts and candy with. Case in point, Penelope led Ruby to the dining area, where she got to work on baking up a batch of frozen mint brownies, one of the most popular treats at the lodge. While BB scampered off to clean tables, Penelope gave the reindeer the honor of licking the baking spoon. The red-haired adventurer prided herself on trying to know everyone in Christmastown, so it baffled her as to how she never met the young doe before. Ruby figured it was probably because of how often she stayed tucked away in Santa's toy shop and said as much. Penelope was instantly curious as to what a reindeer was doing in the factory where the elves worked, and so, for the next hour or two, Ruby poured her heart out over her family history, how her nose didn't glow, her desire to invent things, and all her screw-ups, including the one that led to Santa politely kicking her out of the workshop. It was the most talking she'd done in a while, and it felt good to tell someone how much all this stuff was bothering her. By story's end, Penelope was thoroughly intrigued by this young misfit. She always had an ear open for gossip, but this took the cake. She pushed a minty dessert toward her new friend and replied, "Well, shucks, kid. Firstly, you've earned yourself an extra brownie for all the stress you've been through. And secondly, if you need a laboratory, why not just set up shop here? The peppermint mine's right next door from here, and it's got plenty of space." Ruby gaped at her in shock. Are you sure? I mean, I wouldn't want to be in the way." "Sure, I'm sure," Penelope winked at her. "And nah, you wouldn't be in the way at all. I'm more than happy to help out someone with so much creativity. Besides, it can get kind of lonesome down in the mines. As much as I love the Bumbles, it'll be nice to have someone new to talk to." The little doe thought long and hard. Santa had warned her not to perform her experiments in the workshop anymore, but he also told her to not give up either. He seemed to believe in her dreams, so who was she to not listen to Santa Claus? Taking her work to the peppermint mine sounded like a good compromise, and truth be told, she deeply missed her afternoons of inventing things. That little warm spark she hadn't felt in her heart for a while suddenly sprung to life again. It was all the more she needed to say, "Well, okay, thanks, Penelope, I'll do it." And so it was that Ruby slipped back into her old routine again. The first day that she arrived back at Santa's workshop to pull cards and gather supplies, she apologized again for the paint cannon incident, even though over a month had passed, and assured everyone she was moving her operation somewhere else. The elves had long since forgiven her and were grateful for the return of the extra help, though this time she kept her collection of scraps piled outside, informing everyone her friend would be by later to pick it up and deliver it to her new inventing spot. Only after a few elves screamed or fainted did Ruby realize that maybe she should have warned them her new friend was the Bumble. Awkward introductions aside, the little deer was excited to get to building again. All the peppermint embedded in the mine gave the caves a sweet smell, and Penelope went through the trouble of setting up dozens of lights and a workbench for her four-legged friend to use. The doe couldn't have been happier. As fun as Santa's toy shop was, it could be incredibly loud and crowded. The mines were far quieter and gave her more breathing room. It was oddly peaceful, and she could see why Penelope liked it so much. Speaking of whom, the redhead had to pass by Ruby's laboratory, as she liked to call it, whenever she brought up another cart full of raw peppermint. She told an endless amount of stories of her adventures in the wilderness, to which the doe hung on every word. It was amazing how much this lady had accomplished, and how she didn't let anything put her down or get in her way. Ruby wished she could be just as self-assured as her friend. Thankfully, Penelope's confidence was infectious, and Ruby found a new burst of inspiration. She soon went back to the drawing board and gave some of her old ideas another attempt. At long last, she got her singing airplane creation to work, mostly thanks to BB and his deep, growly voice. Ives couldn't wait to add it to the elves' Christmas toy list, and Penelope baked a mint chocolate cake to celebrate. Other inventions were a mixed success, however. The little deer managed to get dolls to grow hair, but they kept growing the wrong color. Penelope waved it off, believing most kids wouldn't mind. "Makes them more unique if you ask me," she even commented at one point. Ruby appreciated her friend's kindness, though it was still disheartening to have the color-changing crayons continue to melt, and when the paint cannon went haywire again, she was prepared to shelf the idea for good. At least the mess happened in a cave where the only ones to complain were a bunch of rocks. Penelope seemed undeterred. Every time she passed by, no matter how right or wrong things were going for the reindeer, she shouted nothing but words of encouragement like, "You can do it!" and "Don't give up." Or the times an accident left a mess, she'd just laugh and say, the mines needed redecorating anyway." Finally, the miner arrived one day to find Ruby slumped over at her workbench, a half-built invention shoved in the corner. "I'm out of ideas," the doe explained. "This super-duper teddy bear stuffer should be working, but it's not, and I don't know what I'm doing wrong." Penelope scratched her chin, as she always did when she was giving a lot of thought to something. Eventually she said, "You're probably just burned out. Why don't you hang out at the Peppermint Lodge today and relax? I'm sure BB would love to see ya." With a heavy sigh, the little reindeer followed her red-haired friend out of the mine and up to the ski lodge. Penelope could see the disappointment on Ruby's face plain as day and broke the silence. "You know, I have days where a new recipe I'm trying doesn't come out how I wanted it, or I don't find a single piece of peppermint. Shucks, sometimes I think climbing a mountain's easier," she smiled, "but I keep trying. And then I realize I was searching in the wrong spot, or I just had to look things from a new angle. Whatever project you're working on, I know you'll figure it out. The important thing is to believe in yourself. Belief is what Christmas magic is run on." Ruby stared at the miner, now curious. "You believe in magic?" "Course I do." Penelope twirled around as though she could hold the entire North Pole in her hands. "I only live in the most magical place on Earth." She then pointed to the sky. "What, you stop believing in the sun or the moon when a cloud covers them up?" "Well, no, I know they're still there." The doe wondered what her friend was trying to say. "But that's simple science, not magic." Penelope sighed. "Look, all I'm saying is that just because you haven't found the answer to a problem doesn't mean there isn't one. You'd be surprised how science and magic can go hand in hand." She gave the reindeer a playful wink. "And I know you'll be the one to find a way." "How?" Ruby asked. "Well, you're from the Rudolph family, aren't you?" Penelope said with full confidence. "If anyone can pull it off, it's you."